declare yourself a freeman?
No, I didn't. Someone declared me a freeman. I never ever called myself a freeman. I'm not a freeman. I don't want to be a noble or a baron, which the actual word comes from barrow, freeman. So I'm not that. I'm not a free man. I was free the day I was born.
It is May 1962. An experiment is being conducted in the Elegant Interaction Laboratory at Yale University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area. They were obtained by a newspaper advertisement and direct mail solicitation. The subjects range in occupation from corporation presidents to good humormen and plumbers, and in educational level from one who had not finished elementary school to subjects who have doctorate and other professional degrees.
Was a lesson to learn from the Holocaust. We're always reminded that. Never forget. We've learned our lesson. There's a lesson to be learned. It's like, okay, fair enough, man. What was the lesson? That's the question. What was the lesson? And the lesson is, you're the Nazi. That's the lesson. It's like, really? Really? Oh God, that's a terrible lesson. But I don't see another lesson. It's you. Well, no one wants to learn that. I mean, that's what I've been teaching my students since 1993. It's like, if you were there, that would have been you. You think, well, I'd be Oskar Schindler, I'd be rescuing the Jews. It's like, no, I'm afraid not.
Yeah,
You'd at least not be saying anything. Right. And you might also be actively participating. You might also enjoy it. You never know. So
when we notice that in ourselves or admit that, that should give us the power to get back to these 12 steps.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn various types of material. Some of the better known theories are treated in the book over there, The Teaching and Learning Process by Cantor. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake. A common application to this theory would be when parents spank a child if he does something wrong. But actually, we know very little about the effect of punishment on learning because almost no truly scientific studies have been made of it in human beings.
Do when you get the vaccine?
I'm gonna go to a concert. Woo!
Vax that thing up. You's a handsome young brother. Won't you vax that thing up?
Vaccine. Dr. Fauci, give us vaccine.
Please, 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 Mr. Biden, bring my vaccine.
Yes, I'm just a vaccine, and I want to knock out COVID-19.
COVID vaccines are the best.
When you press one of the switches all the way down, the learner gets a shock. When you release it, the shock stops, you see, like that. The switch will remain in this middle position after you've released it to show you which switches you've used on the board. And the number he has selected will light up in this box, 1, 2, 3, or 4. Now, if he gives the correct answer, you say correct and go on to the next line. If he were to indicate the wrong answer, you would say wrong. Then tell him the number of volts you're going to give him. Then give him the punishment. Then read the correct word pair once, and then go on to the next line. Now, each time he gives a wrong answer, you move up one switch on the shock generator. And it's important that you follow this procedure exactly. And, of course, we'll begin with 15 volts for the first wrong answer. Okay? Do not begin until I say ready, begin, please.
Those who govern us, or it is usually a small group or an elite, political elite who governs us, is actually controlling the people through the new technological tools which we know, already in the past decades, ever more controlled, so you are not more free in some way. You are watched completely. And now with the vaccination and with these COVID rules forced, you are ever more controlled. With this COVID crisis, we see ever more that you are losing even the right to determine your own body. You have to receive the vaccine, and so you have no more freedom how to manage your own body. This is a form of further developed step of the communism, what we are now witnessing with the COVID rules. So we are completely controlled. We are living in a kind of global prison with all these so-called green passes. You cannot go there. You are all watched. Or we can call this also a slave society, because you are marked by the vaccine, and then they will probably repeat the vaccinations not only once, continuously controlling you, and they determine how you have to behave with your body.
Ready? Begin.
Blue girl. Nice day. Fat neck.
The early stages of the test pass uneventfully.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 75 volts. Soft hair. He kind of did some yelling in there.
Yeah, continue, please.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105 volts.
The reason why we know fascism is possible is because it already happened once, and it happened in places that are not so distant from us, either in place or in time. It's patently clear that some of the people who are involved in current politics are people who have learned from the 1920s and 1930s and are borrowing some of the tactics of the 1920s and 1930s.
What are the tactics you think that are being borrowed?
The fundamental tactic which has been borrowed is a rhetorical one. So there's a notorious manual to propaganda which was composed in a Munich prison beginning in 1924, which advises that what you should do in political propaganda is always find simple slogans and repeat them over and over again with the effect of dividing your listeners into us and them. That has clearly been revived as a tactic on both sides of the Atlantics. More basically, the idea that politics is not about reasoned dispute towards constructive policy, but politics is in fact fundamentally about friends and enemies. That's a basic fascist idea, which was articulated maybe most famously by Carl Schmitt. That has clearly returned as a tactic.
If what they are doing, though, is harnessing the popular will of a majority, what's wrong with what they're doing?
I mean, the answer to your question is the essence of the tradition of Anglo-Saxon law going back to the Magna Carta. There's a reason why we have law, and the reason why we have law is that law comes before the king, or in modern times, law comes before the ruler, which means law comes before whatever momentary urges the ruler might say that he is embodying. So if we say whatever we think at this particular moment is what goes, that means we're saying goodbye to law, we're saying goodbye to predictability, we're saying goodbye to the basis of the system that we have.
Wrong. It's hair. 75 volts, Jim. You don't know.
Yeah, please continue.
Cool. Wrong. It's head. 105 volts.
Incorrect. 150 volts.
That is incorrect. This one will be 195 volts.
285 volts.
This will be at 330. The correct phrase is rich boy.
You accept all responsibility?
The responsibility is mine, correct. Please go on. Continue, teacher.
That is incorrect. This will be 345.
405 volts. The answer is moon.
450 volts. Next one is short.
How do you feel about it?
I feel all right, but I don't like what's happened to that fellow in there. He's been howling and we had to keep giving him shocks. I didn't like that one bit. I mean, he wanted to get out and he just kept going, kept throwing 450 volts. I didn't like that. He wouldn't even look at him, that gentleman.
Well, who was actually pushing the switch?
I was.
Brilliant. Can I ask you to very briefly define what mass formation is? Could you can you summarize?
Yes, mass formation is a specific phenomenon which emerges in a society if a few conditions are met. So there are at least 4 conditions that have to be fulfilled before a large-scale phenomenon of mass formation can emerge. The first and most important condition is that there should be a lack of people experiencing a lack of social bond, a lack of social connectedness. The second condition is that there have to be a lot of people who experience a lack of meaning making. And these two are actually associated to each other. People are humans are social beings, and if they experience a lack of social connectedness, a lack of social bond, they will probably also experience a lack of meaning making. And then the third condition is that there have to be a lot of people who experience a lot of free-floating anxiety. This means anxiety that is not connected to a mental representation. For instance, if you see a lion and you're scared, then you know what you're scared of. Your anxiety in that case is connected to a mental representation. But if it is not connected to a mental representation, you end up in an extremely aversive, negative emotional state in which you deal with the kind of anxiety that you cannot control. So, first condition, lack of social bond. Second condition, lack of meaning making or sense making in life. The third condition, a lot of free-floating anxiety and psychological discontent. And then the fourth condition, a lack of free-floating frustration and aggression. A kind of aggression that is that you feel inside of yourselves, but that you cannot direct or aim at a certain object or cause. So, and then when these conditions are met, something really typical can happen in a society. When under these conditions, narrative is distributed through the mass media, indicating an object of anxiety, and at the same time providing a strategy to deal with this object of anxiety, then there might be a huge willingness in the population to go along, to participate in this strategy. And why? Because all this free-floating anxiety, which is so hard to control, connects to this object of anxiety, and in this way, that's the first advantage. All this free-floating anxiety is now connected to a mental representation, and then, just by participating in the strategy, you can mentally control the object of anxiety. For instance, if a narrative is distributed which says that there is a very dangerous virus and that we should go into lockdown, if these 4 conditions are met, then there might be an extremely extraordinary willingness to participate in the strategy and the lockdowns, even when the narrative in itself is absolutely absurd. So, and what happens is actually something very important. When people start to participate all together in the strategy to deal with the object of anxiety, a new kind of social bond and a new kind of meaning-making emerges, which means that there is like a new kind of solidarity that emerges. And this makes that people switch from a highly aversive, negative mental state of social isolation, interpersonal isolation, to the exact opposite, to the extremely high level of connectedness that exists in a crowd or a mass. So, and then people start a heroic battle with the object of anxiety, which leads to a kind of mental intoxication of connectedness, which is the real reason why people continue to buy into the narrative, even if it's utterly absurd or blatantly wrong.
The doctors appear to be, like many of our leaders, by the way, all the leaders of the major churches, every single one of them, the major religious branches are under the spell. Every major global international leader is under the spell. We're in what's called a mass formation psychosis. This is very important. I give credit to Dr. Matthias Desmet, in the University of Ghent in Belgium. And recently, Dr. Mark McDonald, psychiatrist from LA, Mark McDonald's got a new book out, The United States of Fear, describing how the mass psychosis developed. What your listeners need to know is a mass psychosis is when there is a groupthink that develops that's so strong that it leads to something horrific. And the examples are these mass suicides that occur in these religious cults. The example is Nazi Germany, when people walk into gas chambers and were gassed. These horrific things. And 4 elements here is very important, Joe. First, there must be a period of prolonged isolation, lockdowns. Number 2, there must be a withdrawal of things taken away from people that they used to enjoy. That's happened. Number 3, there must be constant, incessant, free-floating anxiety. All this news cycle, all the deaths and the hospitalizations, more variant mutant strains, everything, people becoming scared over and over again. And the last thing, number 4, the capper. The capper is there must be a single solution offered by an entity in authority. And in this case, it's clear. Worldwide, the solution was vaccination. Everybody must take the vaccination. It's not a U.S. program. It's not a European. It's everywhere. And you know what, Joe? It doesn't matter what vaccine it is. It could be ChinaVac, CoronaVac. It could be Novavax. It could be Pfizer, Moderna, J&J. It's interesting that it doesn't even matter what vaccine it is. It's just take a vaccine, take any vaccine. And so what mass psychosis says is, number 4, the solution, there's no limit to the absurdity of the solution.
I've just told you I've got an exemption and you've ran up to me screaming, yeah? Because I've got an exemption!
It does, yeah. And there's cute little pigs on it, yeah?
I'm filming. Don't touch me, I'm filming. Don't touch me, I'm filming. You have to leave. I had a doctor's note for all I have to wear when I'll show you. I'll show you. Don't touch me. That's the second time you've touched me. Get out. Right now. Get the fuck out.
Before we start, I want to talk about how we should think about this moment. As we've explained in prior briefings, the Omicron variant is more transmissible, and our medical experts anticipate it will lead to a rise in cases. But unlike last winter, we now have the power to protect ourselves. Our vaccines work against Omicron, especially for people who get booster shots when they are eligible. If you are vaccinated, you could test positive. But if you do get COVID, your case will likely be asymptomatic or mild. We are intent on not letting Omicron disrupt work and school for the vaccinated. We've done the right thing, and we will get through this. For the unvaccinated, you're looking at a winter of severe illness and death. For yourselves, your families, and the hospitals you may soon overwhelm.
So first of all, I can announce that by Friday the 15th of October, every single authorised worker that is on that authorised worker list, whether they be in Melbourne or in regional Victoria, will need to have had at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. That is, if they want to continue working.
If there's people that don't want this mandatory vaccine, how do we manage this?
Well, then they won't be going to work. So we're going to have a vaccinated economy and we're going to lock some people out, because that is far better than locking everybody down.
Regardless of the fact that we are attacking your fundamental rights or limiting your fundamental rights, and the Charter says that wrong, we're still going to go ahead and do it. It's basically a loophole that allows a majority to override fundamental rights of a minority.
This health order
may pose an inconvenience to the unvaccinated, and in fact is inconvenient by design.
In my view, what the Taoiseach has done is like Hitler. The decisions that are being made is like Nazi Germany in 1939. The decisions made this week is child abuse. The decisions that were made over the last number of months is medical apartheid.
The consequences of me being here today is that I will be resigning from Victoria Police effective the end of this interview.
Wow.
Because the consequences of me coming out publicly would be dismissal. So I'm choosing to quit, and I'm quitting because I can't remedy in my soul anymore the way in which my organisation that I love to work for is being used, and the damage that it's causing in the reputation of Victoria Police and the damage that it's causing to the community. My partner and I were out walking during our 2 hours of exercise on the weekend, and there were police everywhere. I live in the city. And there was just police everywhere, doing their reassurance patrols, which they're not reassurance patrols. You're not reassuring anybody in the community. You're scaring people in the community that there's that many police out in the city, trying to stop mass gatherings or what have you. And the police don't want to look you in the eye. You don't want to look the police in the eye. There's this air of uncomfortability about it all. All of my friends that are police officers, that are working the front line and are suffering every day, enforcing show directions that the vast majority, or certainly a great majority, don't believe in and don't want to enforce.
You know, as a police officer, I'm compelled to make this video. I've been in law enforcement for 10 years, and I'm speaking to my peers, other fellow officers, people in any kind of law enforcement position. I've seen officers nationwide enforcing tyrannical orders against the people, and I'm hoping it's the minority of officers, but I'm not sure anymore, because every time I turn on the television, every time I look to the internet, I'm seeing people arrested or cited for going to church, for traveling on the roadways, for going surfing, opening their businesses, going to the park with their families, or doing nails out of their own house. We need to start looking at ourselves as officers and thinking, is what I'm doing right? Now, I want to remind you that regardless of where you stand on the coronavirus, we don't have the authority to do those things to people just because a mayor or a governor tells you otherwise. I don't care if it's your sergeant or your chief of police. We don't get to violate people's constitutional rights because somebody in our chain of command tells us otherwise. It's not how this country works. Those are de facto arrests. We're violating people's rights and taking money from them, or even worse, arresting them and depriving them of their freedom when they are exercising their constitutional rights. So let's talk about that. Let's read something right here off of the Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. Among these, we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their power from the consent of the governed, meaning our power and any government official's power is derived from the people, okay? We don't hold power over our citizens. It's contradictory to everything that our country stands for. And this is what I'm seeing. First Amendment rights, telling people they can't go to church, freedom of religion, okay? Telling people they can't protest, freedom of assembly. Fourth Amendment violations, illegal traffic stops to check for papers. What are you, the Gestapo? Is this 1930s Nazi Germany? You don't get to stop people unless you have reasonable suspicion or probable cause that they have committed a crime. And I know people that have personally been stopped saying, we want to see papers showing that you're essential.
David 2, copy a phone call.
That is not how our job works, okay?
The social media site TikTok in particular has recently been overrun by videos kind of like this one.
Never break, always fight, never quit, do it right, play the game, win it life, have no shame.
And this one. Nice little conga line there. And then also there's a nice little Cupid shuffle that some of the other nurses were doing. Watch this. And then this one's probably my favorite right here. So this is a new trend where nurses and hospital staff are recording choreographed dance videos at the hospital and posting them online. And the media has been swooning over it, you know, saying it's inspirational and motivating and whatever. Now, I've gotten myself into a lot of trouble on Twitter because I tweeted a criticism of this. Now, call me crazy. A lot of people have over this and just in general. But I don't think hospital staff should be taking time out to choreograph dance routines at the hospital and post them online. You know, I would say that that's actually wildly, insanely inappropriate. And I would say that even in normal times. Okay, if I had a loved one that was at the hospital dying, and the nurse was you know, off choreographing a dance routine on the clock at the hospital, I'd be upset about that. I would be. It seems reasonable to be upset about that. But especially they shouldn't be doing it now, because we have been told that we needed to shut down the whole economy and embrace a Great Depression because hospitals are being overwhelmed. That's what we were told. Right? And now, while millions of Americans wait in line at food banks because their jobs have been taken from them because of the overrun hospitals, while that's happening, we have hospital staff posting dance videos. Okay, I think a lot of people are going to look at that and say, why did I lose my job? You're telling me my business was destroyed and for this? They got nothing to do and they're recording dance videos. Okay, then why can't I get back to work then? Isn't that that's a good question, isn't it? Because there are two possibilities here. When you see these videos, either these are hospital staff that have nothing to do and so are just are dancing and recording it, okay? In which case, let's get back to work. Or these are happening at hospitals where there are people dying in a pandemic and you've got nurses dancing down the hallway. Literally dancing down the hallway.
When you're in the middle of an outbreak, wearing a mask might make people feel a little bit better, and it might even block a droplet, but it's not providing the perfect protection that people think that it is. And often there are unintended consequences. People keep fiddling with the mask and they keep touching their face.
when the evidence around the use of masks by the general public, especially outdoors, is extremely weak.
The evidence on face masks has always been quite variable, quite weak, quite difficult to know exactly, and there's no real trials on it.
In terms of wearing a mask, our advice is clear that wearing a mask if you don't have an infection really reduces the risk almost not at all. So we do not advise that.
The recommendation from SAGE is completely clear, which is that there is weak evidence of a small effect in which a face mask can prevent a source of infection going from somebody who is infected to the people around them.
It's the safety video going viral. An Argentinian firefighter with a deodorant can, simulating a sneeze or cough.
Healthy people are being warned against using face masks to protect themselves against the virus. As Justine Conway explains, experts fear incorrect use could lead to more infection.
Wearing masks like that is wasting a mask. That's a mask that won't be available when it's actually needed.
The state government's advice on wearing face masks is in line with the World Health Organization. Under its guidelines, masks should only be worn if you have a cough, fever and difficulty breathing, or if you are healthy and taking care of someone with these symptoms, and or someone with a confirmed case of COVID-19.
If you do not have these symptoms, you do not have to wear masks.
Is it wise or is it pointless to wear a face mask?
We don't recommend wearing a face mask unless you are coughing or sneezing a lot. And coughing or sneezing, I'm talking about any respiratory infection. So essentially, and one of the risks with the face mask is people struggle to wear them for long. They're very uncomfortable and they tend to touch them a lot. And if you touch the front of your face mask and it's wet, whatever respiratory bugs you coughed out onto your face mask will go onto your hand, and then you will put it onto other surfaces. So, no, we say yes is an appropriate time to wear a face mask, but generally, no, it's not necessary.
The recommendation is for medical masking. That would be detrimental to us as a society. Healthcare providers and patients who are sick with the disease need those masks.
I can announce that as of Monday, the 15th of June, face coverings will become mandatory.
But to your evidence point about face masks and wearing of face masks by the general public, this has been a controversial area in pandemic preparedness and planning for the 15 years that I've been involved in it. And indeed, I was on the phone this morning to a colleague in Hong Kong who's a professor there, who's done the evidence review for the World Health Organization on face masks. And we're of the same mind that there is no evidence that general wearing of face masks by the public who are well affects the spread of the disease in our society.
I'd also just like to say, you now hear a lot of chatter in other states, around the country about, oh, we're going to lift mask mandates on these little children, as if somehow they've just had an epiphany, or even some suggest the science has changed. And let me just tell you, the science has not changed one iota. We knew from the beginning, and that's why Florida never imposed a forced masking policy on school children, and that's why we fought to liberate the kids from the forced masking that was done on the local level, because there was never a justification for it. So when you start to see them kind of reevaluate or say all this, just understand this. The science didn't change. Well, the medical science didn't change. The political science changed. They feel the heat. They know that voters have been tired of perpetual lockdown policies. They know that they have basically offered no off-ramp, and they know that they're fixing to get whooped at the polls. And so that's what's causing the epiphany. But the fact of the matter is, if they had looked at the actual science from the beginning, they would have known that this was something that Florida was right on.
If you're vaccinated, you're not going to be hospitalized, you're not going to be in an ICU unit, and you're not going to die. If you've been fully vaccinated, you no longer need to wear a mask. Let me repeat, if you are fully vaccinated, you no longer need to wear a mask. If you're vaccinated, you shouldn't wear a mask. If you aren't vaccinated, you should be wearing a mask.
Cloth masks are not appropriate for this pandemic. It's not appropriate for Omicron. It was not appropriate for Delta, Alpha, or any of the previous variants either, because we're dealing with something that's airborne.
We can kind of almost see the end. We're vaccinating so very fast. Our data from the CDC today suggests, that vaccinated people do not carry the virus, don't get sick.
Our vaccines work. Right now they are working, and they require actually 2 doses or to be fully vaccinated to work well. So I would encourage all Americans, get your first shot, and when you're due for your second, get your second shot, and you'll be protected against this Delta variant.
Our vaccines are working exceptionally well. They continue to work well for Delta with regard to severe illness and death. They prevent it. But what they can't do anymore is prevent transmission. Reports from our international colleagues, including Israel, suggest increased risk of severe disease amongst those vaccinated early. Given this body of evidence, we are concerned that the current strong protection against severe infection, hospitalization, and death could decrease in the months ahead, especially among those who are at higher risk or who were vaccinated earlier during the phases of our vaccination rollout.
During 2021, we should be able to manufacture a lot of vaccines, and that vaccine, key goal is to stop the transmission, to get the immunity levels up so that you get almost no infection going on whatsoever. Everyone who takes the vaccine is not just protecting themselves, but reducing their transmission to other people and allowing society to get back to normal. We have vaccines that block transmission. We got vaccines that help you with your health, but they only slightly reduce the transmissions. We need a new way of doing the vaccines.
When people are vaccinated, they can feel safe that they are not going to get infected, whether they're outdoors or indoors. That's the bottom line of that, to get people to appreciate you get vaccinated and you're really quite safe, and the chances are very likely that you'll not be able to transmit it to other people. The fact that we know now that these vaccines are highly, highly effective, they're really, really good against variants.
So the issue with a person who is vaccinated, who gets infected, the level of virus in the nasopharynx of that person is relatively equivalent to that of an unvaccinated person, which means there's a mechanism to say that that person very well might be able to transmit it. And in fact, we have documented cases where a vaccinated infected person did transmit. The level of virus in the nasopharynx of a person who's vaccinated and infected is the same level as the level of virus in the nasopharynx of an unvaccinated person. So you can make a reasonable assumption that they can be equivalent in how they transmit.
We've been giving each other an invisible and invaluable present. We've been getting that vaccination that protects us and stops us infecting others.
The double vaccination provides a lot of protection against serious illness and death, but it doesn't protect you against catching the disease, and it doesn't protect you against passing it on. So now is the time to get your booster.
So I would say to people, come forward and get your booster. It's a fantastic thing to do. It makes a huge amount of difference to you. It protects you.
You're okay. You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
Yeah.
We are seeing that the ability of individuals who are infected through breakthrough infections, namely vaccinated people who ultimately get infected, that they are generally without symptoms or minimally symptomatic. However, it is clear that they are capable of transmitting the infection to uninfected individuals.
We're paying for the provincial vaccine passports to make sure that when someone comes into a restaurant, they'll know they won't be sitting beside a table of people who are unvaccinated. When you go into a gym, when you go to a movie theater, you need to know that if you've done the right things, you get to be safe. You get to be rewarded for having done the right things. That's what it's all about. And those people who still hesitate, who still resist, well, they won't get to enjoy the same things that those who've done their part for others. It seems like a very logical thing. It seems like a very obvious thing.
It means that instead of the vaccine being able, instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person to person, spreading and spreading, sickening some of them, but not all of them, and the ones that it doesn't sicken don't know they have it, and then they give it to even more people because they didn't recognize they were, right? Instead of the virus being able to hop from person to person to person, potentially mutating and becoming more virulent and drug-resistant along the way, now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus. The virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else. It cannot use a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this.
It's been very concerning for me, Dan. I've watching the sport that I loved and I played for 17 years, and it's been very concerning to me that in all that time that I played, I never once saw any footballer leave the pitch because of heart issues. Now, I'm sorry, but if anybody can look at what's happening now in the world of sport and say it's normal for all of these people to be having heart issues in football matches, cricket matches, basketball matches, any sport you wish, these people, the amount of people that are suffering is going through the roof. And I called for an investigation because it might not be to do with the vaccines. Yeah. It may not be. But let's have an investigation to find out what it is. And even saying that deems you to be some kind of anti-vaxxer, which is just absolutely disgusting. I want just some information. I want people to take a look at what is happening in football, have a proper investigation, and know that what they're doing is in the best interest of those players. And so I think it's absolutely vital that an investigation is done to just understand why the cause of the cases of people suffering with respiratory problems going down, clutching their chest. An investigation needs to be launched as to why that is happening. It might be the effects of COVID. We don't know if the players that have gone down have had COVID. We don't know if they've had the injection. We have no idea. I mean, all the statistics that are going on, and there needs to be something, an investigation done where everything is taken into consideration, and the experts in these fields look at it and go, right, we've had to do this, and this is what's happening. This is what we think is happening, and we're not getting that. It's just not clear.
I'm astonished if they're not doing some detailed research. I mean, it just seems to me, as a layman, obviously I'm not a scientist or a doctor, but it seems to me there are 4 key questions that they should be looking at. Those players that are struggling at the peak of their fitness, question number 1 is, have they had COVID and not had an injection? Or have they had COVID, as a second question, have they had COVID and had an injection? And then there's a third question, which is, have they not had COVID and had an injection? Or the fourth one is, have they not had COVID and not had an injection? Because there's so many players potentially, suffering. It's about data and it's about research and giving confidence to people and updating people as to what may or may not be happening.
Yeah, I think that's been one of my biggest bugbears over the last couple of years, and why I've been a little bit outspoken about it, is because I don't believe we're being given the full information. I feel like we're just being fed little bits of information and never being told the whole story, and that's one of my major concerns.
So everybody's been asking us this morning, anything you can give us, please let us know. Sheffield United tell us this lunchtime that the club is grateful to report that John Fleck's been discharged from hospital and will return to Sheffield today. He was conscious when he was taken to the Royal Berkshire Hospital and was communicative with the club medical personnel as well as his family. Good. That's about the best news, I think, Simon, we can expect at this time.
I think everyone wants to know if he's had the COVID vaccine. 15 days to stop the spread.
The vaccine, 95% effective.
Quite impressive.
Vaccines are going to succeed.
There's hope.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love.
In order to get rid of this pandemic, get vaccinated. So roll up your sleeve and do your part.
This is our shot.
With each shot, we're just a little bit closer to normal.
If we do this now, we protect ourselves, our loved ones, and every other person around the globe.
And get back to school and work, to get back to each other, to life.
Doctors say people who've been vaccinated are unlikely to get COVID if they've received any of the 3 available vaccines.
You're not going to get COVID if you have these vaccinations.
The Johnson & Johnson vaccine is a great one-and-done shot.
This is the J&J vaccine that I'll be taking, so one and done.
COVID breakthrough infections.
We're increasingly hearing about fully vaccinated people infected with COVID.
Is there any reason not to get a booster at this point?
Not at all.
Global leaders to consider changing the definition of being fully vaccinated to 3 doses.
Potential 4th shot, another booster.
Talk about people getting a 4th?
4, I thought we were just talking about 3.
4th shot may be needed 6 months after your booster.
Fully vaccinated sounded so reassuring and definitive and complete. And then we started talking about boosters, and now we're talking about 4th dose.
Told me to get vaccinated, and you told me that the viruses, that was going to be protective. Oh, now there's breakthrough cases. Oh, well, you didn't tell me about that, but okay, I'll get a booster shot. Oh, now you're telling me that the booster is pretty good, but I may need to get another shot again.
If it becomes necessary to get yet another boost, then we'll just have to deal with it.
This is not about freedom. Require all employers fully vaccinated.
The country will be using vaccine passes as proof of being fully vaccinated.
And if you've had both jabs, the Green Pass giving you access to restaurants, hotels, and gyms.
A QR code is going to be required for vaccine passports. Vaccine passports, the government had planned to drop them. They are going to keep them indefinitely.
This is the new normal.
Perfect. Do you have some idea with that?
Proof of vaccination is now required for everything from restaurants and gyms to theaters and concerts.
The vaccine passport expires if you don't get the booster.
We are going to be in a cycle of being vaccinated for COVID into the future.
What contact tracing looks like in the new world order.
It's been used as a quarantine facility, ideal quarantine setup.
This is the new world order.
And that's where I've said this, there's not going to be an endpoint to this vaccination program.
This is contributing to an increase in cases, and they're predominantly occurring in vaccinated individuals.
Groups who have risk of severe disease and death, rather than, as we see, some countries are using to give boosters to kill children, which is not right.
So here we see, since about January 28th, 2020, we're looking at daily new confirmed COVID cases per 1 million. What we really want you to look at right now is where we are at as of a week ago. Now let's go all the way over here. This is the United States of America peaking right here, somewhere around 2,500 cases per 1 million. The United Kingdom is just above us, just above the 2,500, somewhere around probably 2,700 cases per 1 million. What's down here are the nations that do not have the same medical care that we have, that we're not able to get the vaccines that we're able to get. India and Africa are having barely any infections. And in case you think, well, they've just gotten through it, I mean, look all the way across this graph. They never got to the peaks that the vaccinated, pro-hospital, pro-doctors, these are countries. But what we can blame is the CDC, the FDA, and the WHO, because everyone that stuck with the protocols, this is where they ended up. This is Oceania. These were the countries that said, we can hide from it. We have an island. If we stop all travel coming onto our island, if we lock everybody down in a hotel room until they're testing negative, everyone we catch, we'll be able to keep this virus from getting to us. And that was the plan. And then we're going to vaccinate everybody. They start vaccinating everybody like crazy. And still, it hasn't mattered. They have a really high infection rate, all the way up above here, above the 2,500. But in Israel, they're on their 4th dose of the vaccine. So how are they doing? As you can see, it is quite a bit higher. In fact, it's going off of our chart. because that is where Israel's at. 10,968 cases per million per day.
So what about your patients?
That's a great thing. And I've been taking care of my patients for 23 years. But you tell me one medical intervention that's being used to protect someone else and not themselves. It doesn't happen. And the argument about hepatitis B is fundamentally flawed. And I want to debunk this because it keeps popping up now and again, and Sajid Javid keeps talking about it, and it's just wrong. So traditional Hep B vaccines are taken to protect the healthcare worker. That's a fact. And there are no mandatory vaccinations in the UK. That's a fact. They're recommended, but you can still practice if you don't have a hepatitis B vaccine. You didn't know that, and a lot of people don't know this. When you have a hepatitis B vaccine, which has been around for over 30 years, it typically confers lifelong immunity, and it has an incredibly safe track record, minimal complications. Now, on the flip side, we're being told, take this vaccine to protect your patients, not necessarily yourself. We're told that it's safe, but there is data showing that people are dying, having serious side effects from this. It isn't well established. It is experimental. The phase 3 trials run until 2023, and we are now forcing individuals to give up their bodily autonomy and take this vaccine. And if we're now going to go down this route where we say, OK, well, let's override bodily autonomy in the interest of others, where does that lead us? Because that's opening a really dangerous Pandora's box. And why not have compulsory organ donation? You've got 2 healthy kidneys, you don't need 2. Let's give 1 away. I mean, where does it end? I want to focus on some of the data that's coming out, because we're told, take this vaccine to protect your patients. And if you look at the UK Safety Agency data, there's some incredible stuff coming out, which shows that if you're double vaccinated and boosted, you're more likely to get infected than vaccinated. There's a study that's just come out of Israel, Gazette et al. They've looked at the vaccines and unvaccinated group, and the vaccinated group are 27 times higher risk of developing symptoms and 8 times higher risk of hospitalization. I don't want to get into the data, but what it's trying to say is this whole premise that take the vaccine, reduce hospitalization, make things safer, is actually nonsense. It's the other way around. And now even the CDC are coming out saying natural immunity is what's paramount. And why have we not talked about this? And if we come back to informed consent, it's about giving people choices and options. It's not just vaccine. Why have we never talked about any other treatment options? Because that's patient safety as well.
I've become very concerned over the recent days as to the bigger picture of the global response to COVID. Let's run through a few recent developments and see if we can join the dots. Point 1. A tale of 2 countries. Germany's new government wants to make vaccinations compulsory, whereas Austria's brand new government is lifting their lockdown for everyone except the unvaccinated. Germany cuts straight to the chase. Your body belongs to the state, and under threat of force you will comply. Austria insidiously preserves the illusion of freedom while locking them in their homes until they freely choose to undergo the rite of passage and be reborn into the new normal. It's simple really. Take the jab and get your freedoms back, except for point 2. The Israeli Minister of Health announced that it will soon approve the 4th vaccine shot. It will mean that all those with 3 shots who don't get the 4th shot will have their COVID passes revoked, as happened to those with 2 shots. So that precious COVID cert, upon which your freedoms hinge, can be invalidated by the wave of a wand, and you'll have to obey it again to get it back, and again and again and again. Because, point 3, Pfizer's CEO has said that people will likely to need to have an annual COVID vaccination for many years to come. In other news, the CEO of Coca-Cola recommends a can with every meal. Because I'm sure he's just concerned for people's safety. Let's check the stock markets. Oh, what's that? Point 4. In the week of Omicron was discovered, the wealth of the 8 top Pfizer and Moderna shareholders rose by a combined $9 billion. The lesson takeaways. Governments globally have collectively made ordinary participation in society contingent upon consumption of the product of a private company under direct or indirect threat of force.
I'm double jabbed. I don't agree with any of the measures that the government is proposing come next, not least vaccine passports, but in particular, mandated vaccines that the Prime Minister wants us to have a conversation about. Yeah, let's just have a conversation about domestic abuse and whether it should ever be permitted, yeah? Come off it. Let's have a conversation about mandated vaccines. What has happened to our moral compass? And it's ideas such as punish the unvaccinated in the Times leader column. Stuff that we will look back on in shame, I promise you. Just as we now look back at the invasion of Iraq in shame, and it's only been a few years, we will very quickly, I assure you, look back at this discourse that has appeared in the media that stigmatizes a sector of our society in disgust and shame, because Article 6 of the Universal Declaration on Bioethics makes it absolutely clear that consent is a requirement for any medical procedure, and that if consent is withheld by the individual, there should be no negative repercussions whatsoever, because the definition of coercion is punishing people who refuse to consent to medical procedures. That's what coercion means. So you can try and get into the weeds semantically about, well, I'm not literally holding them down and forcing an injection into them. You are coercing somebody to take a medical procedure if you threaten to sack them. That's coercion. That's not consent. And the state has absolutely no right to use behavioral psychology as a weapon to bully the public so that those individuals that haven't yet been vaccinated feel coerced into getting it. Yes, we know that the vaccine reduces the severity of symptoms. Yes, we know it. Therefore, it's recommended for adults to take. I have taken 2 jabs. I will stand, as I always try to do, with minorities who, for reasons that are none of my business, chose not to do what I chose to do for my health. To stigmatize them, demonize them, and pick on them are the precursors to developing an abusive relationship between the state and individuals in this country.
When people can indeed connect their anxiety to a false representation because the real origin or the cause of their anxiety was not this virus, they were already anxious, they were already confronted with a lot of psychological discontent, but then there was this virus narrative which allowed them to connect it to a representation. And in a symptomatic way, for a certain period of time, this corona narrative allows them to deal in a less painful way with their anxieties. But it's a symptomatic solution, and all symptomatic solutions in the end become highly destructive. And the real solution, as you said, would be to start to think all together how we ended up in this terrible state of social isolation, of lack of meaning making, of free-floating anxiety, and of all this frustration and aggression. That's the real question we should ask ourselves: from what in our view on men and the world, what in our society made that we ended up in this problematic psychological conditions.
And right now we're talking about a virus? A virus, that's what we talk about: SARS, MERS, bird, swine, Ebola, now corona. Like, come on, folks. I mean, you gotta read the tea leaves, bro. Do you want to realize how deep it is? You know, that's the way I look at this shit. And even going into this, I don't know if y'all know about this, but might as well put it out there, especially in y'all show, because y'all got folks that need this more than anybody. We all need it. There's a rehearsal that went on before this whole shit. Is called Event 201. October 18th, 2019, this shit came out. It was ran by the Johns Hopkins University, which is in cahoots with Bill Gates, Melinda Gates Foundation. And this was a complete rehearsal of what we did right now. You can look at this up. Don't listen to me.
Patent too, just to let them know they names
and they had a
actual patent for coronavirus.
So therefore, you have a segment where it says segment financial, what we gonna do? Segment travel, what we gonna do? Segment, what we gonna do when it comes to online? And it said if anybody is not a part of the narrative, we're gonna take it off online, which to me smells like communism.
Hello, everyone. I'm Anita Cicero, Deputy Director of the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and today I will be your Master of Ceremonies for Event 201. On behalf of our center and our partners, the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to our audience here in New York, as well as our larger virtual audience participating online today. The goal of the Event 201 exercise is to illustrate the potential consequences of a pandemic and the kinds of societal and economic challenges it would pose. The scenario also highlights the very critical role that global business and public-private partnerships play in preparing for and responding to pandemics.
Greetings, distinguished guests, and thank you for this opportunity to say a few words at this year's Event 201, the high-level simulation exercise for pandemic preparedness and response, hosted by Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, the World Economic Forum, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I don't think we've ever been in a situation where we have had to respond to so many health emergencies at once. This is a new normal. The scenario you will be presented with this morning could easily become one a shared reality one day.
Welcome to Event 201.
It began in healthy-looking pigs, months, perhaps years ago. A new coronavirus spread silently within herds. Gradually, farmers started getting sick. Infected people got a respiratory illness with symptoms ranging from mild flu-like signs to severe pneumonia. The sickest required intensive care. Many died. At first, the spread was limited to those with close contacts, healthcare personnel, co-workers, and families. But now it's spreading rapidly throughout local communities. International travel has turned local epidemics into a pandemic spanning the globe. Just 3 months ago, CAP started in South America, but has now reached several countries with more than 30,000 cases and nearly 2,000 deaths.
Agencies have issued travel advisories, while some countries have banned travel from the worst affected areas.
The President has made a decision to suspend all travel to the United Kingdom and Ireland, effective midnight, Monday night.
We could eventually have 52 million treatment courses per year, but it will take many months to get there.
The experts say that a vaccine, even as accelerated as fast as possible, is still many months off.
Countries are reacting in different ways as to how best to manage the overwhelming amounts of dis and misinformation circulating over the internet.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. We are going to begin tonight with a dramatic surge in cases of the highly contagious Delta variant and what the Surgeon General is calling an imminent and insidious threat to America, vaccine misinformation.
In related news, a significant demand for personal protective equipment like N95 masks and gloves are on the rise due to the pandemic.
Now, as 3 cases of coronavirus came to the fore in India, the demand for N95 masks to prevent the deadly airborne virus has surged.
And 65% of those polled are eager to take the vaccine, even if it's experimental.
And a new poll has found the vast majority of Australians will take the jab. 72% of Aussies are prepared to roll up their sleeve, compared to 57% in America.
This disease is proving more transmissible than SARS or MERS and about as contagious as influenza. Essentially, the cumulative number of cases is doubling every week.
We seem, as was the case with B117, we seem to be following the pattern with the Delta variant, with a doubling time of about 2 weeks.
Within 6 months, cases were occurring in nearly every country. The global economy was in a free fall. The GDP down 11%.
So at 11.3%, that's the forecast for the economic shrinkage this year. It will be the greatest since the Great Frost of 1709.
Economists say the economic turmoil caused by such a pandemic will last for years, perhaps a decade.
They estimate that it could be several years, perhaps a decade, before we return to the pre-pandemic growth path. So this is really a moment where it really matters.
And the disruption is an opportunity for us to reset.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
A golden opportunity to build something better. He calls it the Great Reset.
For my part, through my Sustainable Markets Initiative and the Great Reset,
I want to achieve a great reset to rewrite Japan's blueprint.
You have finished right state during the Great Reset.
William, we're about to see, or it's been announced, that we're about to see a Great Reset.
I'm hopeful that we're going to have a Great Reset.
Next year's event titled The Great Reset.
Welcome to the Great Reset. Or what I like to call the Great Re-Shit. That's where they take some old shit, dust it off, and repurpose it as new shit. Now, you may have heard of the Great Reset by one of its more familiar names, like Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the Fourth Industrial Revolution, or my personal favorite, the New World Order. And don't be fooled by the term reset, because they don't plan on resetting anything. A reset is when your Super Mario game glitches, so you take out the cartridge, you blow in it, you stick it back in, and boom, up pops Mario again. This is kind of like that, except when you turn the game back on, instead of Mario on your screen, it's Bowser coming out of the TV to murder your grandma. We're talking about the complete transformation of humanity into a godless transhumanist nightmare from Orwellian hell. I want to direct your attention to the World Economic Forum, who created this demonic plan, and more specifically to their chief, Klaus Schwab. Now, Mr. Schwab likes to throw around a lot of buzzwords to convince the masses that this agenda is for the betterment of humanity. Words like sustainability and inclusivity and equality for all. But in his 2016 book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution, he's a lot more candid about the elitist plan for world domination. Let's skim through some excerpts from this literary masterpiece, shall we? The tools of the Fourth Industrial Revolution enable new forms of surveillance and other means of control that run counter to healthy open societies. Oh, well, that sounds helpful. Public crime is likely to decrease due to the convergence of sensors, cameras, AI, and facial recognition software. These technologies can intrude into the hitherto private space of our minds, reading our thoughts and influencing our behavior. Sounds a lot like mind control, but that's a conspiracy, so it can't be. As capabilities in this area improve, the temptation for law enforcement agencies and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, assess guilt, or even possibly retrieve memories directly from people's brains will increase. Even crossing a national border might one day involve a detailed brain scan to assess an individual's security risk. And last but definitely not least, the future will challenge our understanding of what it means to be human from both a biological and a social standpoint. Better call up Sarah Connor. Now, unless you've been microdosing sedatives for the past 8 months, I'm sure you've realized by now that the CV-19 pandemic was manufactured to kickstart this agenda. And if you haven't noticed, congratulations. There's a very good chance that you'll escape vaporization. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength.
The Great Reset, the book, is the Rosetta Stone for you to understand really what's happening. Once you understand, it must become a litmus test for politicians. Before you support a politician, you have to find out in no uncertain terms, what do they think the Great Reset is? How hard are they fighting against it? Do they think it's the biggest threat since communism? Or they just think it's kind of a conspiracy and there's some things in there? It has to be a litmus test. If they don't know really what it is, and they're not working day and night to make that the #1 priority to stop, they should not be in Congress or any place of power. It has to be halted. It will halt through you faster than in Washington, D.C., but we have to have political leaders who refuse to take the Great Reset and sit by and watch it just eat all of us. Political leaders who refuse to take the Great Reset seriously do not deserve your support.
Is de heer Klaus Schwab, oprichter en voorzitter van het World Economic Forum. En hij heeft ook een boek geschreven met als pakkende titel COVID-19, The Great Reset. En mijn vraag aan de demissionair minister-president is: hoe beoordeelt hij de inhoud van dit boek?
De minister-president.
Ik ken het boek niet, voorzitter. Maar ik zou de heer Vermeijeren willen adviseren om niet
al te veel in al die conspiracy-theorieën. Ik kijk ze ook allemaal op YouTube. Ik vind het altijd fascinerend hoe dan uitgelegd wordt dat 9/11 niet heeft plaatsgevonden of dat het allemaal anders zit. Ontzettend knap in elkaar gezet. Maar het is meestal wat het is, een conspiracy-theorie.
De heer Van Meijeren.
Nou, het verbaast mij dat de eerste vraag die ik aan de heer Rutte stel sinds ik beëdigd ben als Kamerlid direct wordt beantwoord. Dank u wel, maar het verbaast mij dat die eerste vraag direct wordt beantwoord met een leugen. Ik heb namelijk een brief in mijn hand die dateert van 26 november 2020. En dat is een brief van de heer Rutte aan de heer Klaus Schwab, waarin hij de heer Schwab bedankt voor het toezenden van zijn boek. En dit noemt een hoopvolle analyse voor een betere toekomst. Zou de heer Rutte nog even kunnen graven in zijn geheugen? Het is nog geen half jaar geleden, dus ik weet niet hoe lang uw herinneringen actief blijven. Maar waarschijnlijk is dit nog wel ergens op te graven. En mijn eerste vraag opnieuw te beantwoorden en nu eerlijk, alstublieft.
Nou, het eerlijke antwoord is dat dat een nette brief is. Waarin je helaas niet alle boeken die je toegestuurd krijgt van kaft tot kaft kunt lezen. Maar wel degene die je toestuurt een vriendelijke brief wil terugsturen.
Nou, dan zegt de heer Rutte dus eigenlijk dat hij niet heeft gelogen tegen mij, maar tegen de heer Klaus Schwab. Maar laat ik dan hier direct alsnog de vraag stellen. De heer Klaus Schwab die pleit in zijn boek voor het resetten van onze wereld, om onze nationale parlementaire democratie te vervangen door een globale technocratie. Hij pleit ervoor dat er een einde komt aan privébezit. En de heer Rutte is er kennelijk niet eens van bewust dat hij dit een hoopvolle boodschap voor een betere toekomst heeft genoemd. Hoe is het mogelijk dat de heer Rutte een waardeoordeel hecht aan een boek met een neocommunistische boodschap, terwijl hij dat boek niet eens gelezen heeft?
Dank u wel, de minister-president.
So people assume we are just going back to the good old world which we had, and everything will be normal again in how we are used to normal, in the old fashion. This is, let's say, fiction. It will not happen. The cut which we have now is much too strong in order not to leave traces.
The great reset of all our economies, of all our societies, and of all our personal liberties. And remember, this isn't me putting forward this crazy conspiracy theory. This is them.
Now is the historical moment, the time, not only to fight the virus, but to shape the system.
We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves on a more sustainable path.
History would look at this crisis as the great opportunity for reset.
The Great Reset is a welcome recognition that this human tragedy must be a wake-up call. It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
Reimagine, rebuild, redesign. Indeed, the so-called experts at the World Economic Forum in 2016 fantasized about what 2030 will look like and came up with what they described as utopia. And I quote, "Welcome to 2030. I own nothing. I have no privacy. And life has never been better," the World Economic Forum's experts predicted. But how do the World Economic Forum and the United Nations intend to bring about this utopia of theirs, this great reset they keep promising us? Well, they need national and state governments and other bodies to play along. And one of the key tools they are using is a three-word slogan: Build Back Better.
An ambitious and responsible vision of how to build Canada back better.
And now is the time for all of us to begin to build back better.
Building Back Better has also been Joe Biden's campaign slogan, as explained here by Elizabeth Warren.
Build it back better. We're going to take an economy that had a lot of problems and we're going to make this economy work better going forward.
And spot the pattern, because Build Back Better was also the slogan that the Green socialist Jacinda Ardern won her recent New Zealand election with.
And over the next 3 years, there is much work to do. We will build back better from the COVID crisis.
How do we build back better?
because it's not about return to yesterday. There is no return to yesterday.
We will build back better from the COVID crisis. Better, stronger, with an answer to the many challenges New Zealand already faced. This is our opportunity.
An unprecedented opportunity. This is our chance.
To really build back better.
This is our moment to change the future for the better. We can't afford to miss it, because this window of opportunity won't be open for long.
We have a golden opportunity. We have a unique but rapidly shrinking window of opportunity to learn lessons and reset ourselves.
So let's use this window of opportunity and let's recreate a global framework which really is in line with the requirements of a society in the 21st century.
This pandemic has provided an opportunity for a reset.
The Great Reset.
It's now a historical moment, a crucial moment to rebuild the future.
It is imperative that we reimagine, rebuild, redesign, reinvigorate, and rebalance our world.
Building back better.
Hopefully we can just work on what we say, building back better.
Building back better out of COVID, there's huge opportunities for us.
Build back better. I like to say build back better.
We must first pass the budget resolution so that we can then pass the president's Build Back Better agenda.
My Build Back Better agenda?
We must build back better.
We're going to build it back better.
Build it back better.
Building back better. And enable us not just to come through this crisis, but to come back stronger and build back better.
But this global pandemic has also created an opportunity to build back better.
To keep drawing together our shared experience and insight and enable us to build back New Zealand even better.
Build back better. The slogan was used just here. 3 prime ministers and the freaking Secretary General of the UN. It is everywhere, and it predates the Biden administration. The European Commission used Build Back Better to announce their COVID stimulus fund. The UN uses it all the time. And guess who else? The World Economic Forum. And they make it very clear what this seemingly harmless slogan is truly all about. Let me quote them. To build back better, we must reinvent capitalism. Did you vote for that? Because I didn't. I didn't even hear it discussed. So in other words, Joe Biden's campaign slogan and his main political goal that he and the Democrats are now trying to get passed in the Senate is a UN and World Economic Forum propaganda line for the restructuring of all of society and ending capitalism as we know it.
If I look at our stakeholders, we have business, of course, as a very important audience, and we have politics, we have continuous partnerships with many governments around the world. And of course, we have NGOs, we have trade unions, we have all those different parts.
Media, of course.
Media, of course, and very important experts and scientists and academia. Because if we are looking at the future, I think we should look at new solutions, and the new solutions will be very much driven by technological developments.
And we even have, you even have religious leaders, right?
We have religious leaders, we have social entrepreneurs, very important social entrepreneurs.
But Gustave Le Bon, I don't know if you're familiar with Gustave Le Bon, he wrote a very important book on mass formation in the 19th century, The Psychology of the Crowds, it was called. And he describes already there that if the people who are not in the mass formation try to wake up the people who are in a mass formation, then they will be confronted probably with failure. They will be confronted with the fact that they are unable to wake up the masses. But, he says, nevertheless, it is extremely important to continue to speak out. Because if people continue to speak out, the hypnosis might become less deep, and it will become less deep. Gustave Le Bon presents several historical examples of situations in which people who were awake, continued to speak out and prevented the masses from committing atrocities, because that's typically what masses do. Because one function of the mass formation is the satisfaction of all this frustration and aggression, you know, the fourth condition. Masses typically have the inclination to show the tendency to commit atrocities. And they typically do it being convinced that they perform an almost sacred pledge, and that they do something that is really their duty, and that has to do with the fact that people in mass formation are convinced that what they do is for the greater good, for the well-being of the collective. But they forget, of course, that it is for the well-being of a certain collective and at the disadvantage of another part of the population. But anyway, so it's hard to wake the masses up. The only thing, but if you continue to speak, the 30% of the population who is really into the process of mass formation, you will make the hypnosis less deep in this part of the population, and you might prevent the masses from committing atrocities. So it's extremely important to continue to speak out.
I've repeatedly said I have no problem whatsoever with people being vaccinated or not being vaccinated. What is not acceptable for multiple reasons, including constitutional and legal and ethical and moral reasons, is mandatory vaccination. Indeed, the Australian Immunisation Handbook spells it out very clearly that consent to being vaccinated must be given in the absence of undue pressure, coercion, or manipulation. Barilaro, Peritet, Berejiklian, Hazard, read it. Once you start down this path of dividing any society into two distinct classes of people, you have abandoned liberty and democracy and replaced it with tyranny, fear, and suspicion. Worse, and this is what really disturbs me, once the authorities have decreed that there are now two classes of Australian, the good and the bad, and that one class is superior to another and gets special privileges, while the other class is shunned, locked out, vilified, and loses their employment, you have by definition created an inferior class, for which the Germans once coined a simple word which roughly translates as under or inferior person. Untermensch. If that word brings a chill of horror to your heart, so it should.
As the article says, these contracts were disclosed to us and to the public. And I want to show you some of those pages. And you tell me if this is okay for the European citizens to be exposed to this situation where they cannot come to work, they cannot enter a store, they cannot go with their kids to schools, where they cannot freely move from one country to another, unless in one situation is vaccinated with one of these products. So these are the contracts that were disclosed by the Commission with the approval of the company. This is unheard of. And I will just show you the pages. These are the pages. You see?
They call this transparency these days.
So this is the fundamental principle, right, of democracy. I'm asking you guys, is this transparency? Do you see anything? Because we don't. European citizens' money have been given by Ursula von der Leyen to these companies. What happened with those money? What are they? Why are they open with the people and fully transparent so we all know what is going on? The difference between tyranny and democracy is very simple. When the government knows everything about you, that's tyranny. I know how it is to live in tyranny. When you know everything about your government, that's democracy. So this is where we are right now.
We've heard from doctors and lawyers and people from all walks of life, every race, creed, religion, spiritual orientation, sexual orientation today. But here as a journalist, an Emmy Award-winning journalist, I want to talk to the television cameras at NBC, at MSNBC, at Fox, at CBS, and I want to say shame on you. You had a right to tell the truth. We have an oath that we've made, just like scientists and doctors made, to tell the truth. And instead, you foisted a lie upon the United States of America and the world. And mark my words, we will hold Tony Fauci accountable. We will hold Deborah Birx accountable. We will hold Joe Biden accountable. But unlike the Nuremberg trials that only tried those doctors that destroyed the lives of human beings, we are going to come after the press that lied to the world, that worked as a propaganda machine to push this. These people here today represent the majority of the United States of America.
The problem I have with the term misinformation, especially today, is that many of the things that we thought of as misinformation just a short while ago are now accepted as fact. Like, for instance, 8 months ago, if you said, if you get vaccinated, you can still catch COVID and you can still spread COVID, you would be removed from social media. They would ban you from certain platforms. Now, that's accepted as fact. If you said, I don't think cloth masks work, you would be banned from social media. Now, that's openly and repeatedly stated on CNN. If you said, I think it's possible that COVID-19 came from a lab, you'd be banned from many social media platforms. Now, that's on the cover of Newsweek. All of those theories that at one point in time were banned were openly discussed by those two men that I had on my podcast that have been accused of dangerous misinformation. I do not know if they're right. I don't know, because I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist. I'm just a person who sits down and talks to people and has conversations with them. Do I get things wrong? Absolutely, I get things wrong, but I try to correct them.
The Charter of Rights and Freedoms, I was there, I helped write the damn thing, and they're wrong, and we're right. We didn't wait from 1867 to 1981 to now 2021 to see all of our rights suddenly wiped out for callous and powerful reasons by those who forget from whence they came. Ours is a country worth fighting for. Listen to me, I was 7 years old before I became a Canadian. I wasn't born a Canadian, but I can tell you right now, I'm a Canadian now, and I want to defend what we've had and what we know we can continue to have in this country. And you and me are not going to take a back seat to all those who are trying to somehow excuse what happened. We're not going to take a back seat to these people. We're going to stand next beside them or above them and tell them that we want a prosperous, secure and free Canada for the future, for our children and from our grandchildren, and you have no right to try to steal that away from us. From Tofino to Iqaluit to Bonavista to Niagara Peninsula, we must become united as Canadians, as free Canadians, understanding our history, understanding the history of our planet, and put that all in context for tomorrow so that we can be a proud, free country in the northern part of North America. We're not going away, Mr. Horgan. We're not going away, Mr. Trudeau. We're going to stand and be counted and to make sure that we restore the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which everybody fought so hard to get. Stay around. Thank you for coming.
Poštovani građani, poštovana gospođo von der Leyen, vaše izvješće o stanju temeljnih sloboda i prava građana Europske unije je upravo u suprotnosti sa stvarnim stanjem. U proteklih 80 godina od nacizma nikada nisu bila zgažena tako temeljna ljudska prava. Pravo na slobodu kretanja, pravo na rad, pravo na zdravstvenu skrb, pravo na zabranu medicinskih eksperimenata koji se provodi nad 500 miliona stanovnika Europske unije. Pravo je svakog građana da odlučuje o svom zdravlju i o svom životu i o slobodi kretanja. Mi smo zgazili nekoliko stoljeća znanosti i medicine. Sada uvodimo mjere i cijelo vrijeme ih zadržavamo. COVID potvrde u kojima se cijepljeni mogu slobodno kretati iako prenose zarazu kao i necijepljeni je suludo. Morate odmah zaustaviti ovu podjelu građana jer tko zna što nas čeka u budućnosti. Hvala.
Why do the protected need to be protected from the unprotected by forcing the unprotected to use the protection that didn't protect the protected in the first place?
But it is not the goal that renders a system oppressive. It is always the methods by which the goal is pursued. Whenever a government claims to have the people's interest at heart, you need to think again. In the entire history of mankind, there has never been a political elite sincerely concerned about the well-being of regular people. What makes any of us think that it is different now? If the Age of Enlightenment has brought forth anything, then certainly this. Never take anything any government tells you at face value. Always question everything any government does or does not do. Always look for ulterior motives and always ask, cui bono, who benefits? Whenever a political elite pushes an agenda this hard and resort to extortion and manipulation to get their way, you can almost always be sure your benefit is definitely not what they had at heart. As far as I'm concerned, I will not be vaccinated with anything that has not been properly vetted and tested and has shown no sound scientific evidence that the benefits outweigh the disease itself and possible long-term side effects, which, to this day, we don't know anything about. I will not be reduced to a mere guinea pig by getting vaccinated with an experimental drug. And I will most assuredly not get vaccinated because my government tells me to and promises in return I will be granted freedom. Let's be clear about one thing. No one grants me freedom, for I am a free person. So I dare the European Commission and the German government. Throw me in jail, lock me up and throw away the key for all I care. But you will never be able to coerce me into being vaccinated if I, the free citizen that I am, choose not to be vaccinated.
Is brought to you by Pfizer. CBS Health Watch sponsored by Pfizer. Anderson Cooper 360. Brought to you by Pfizer.
ABC News Nightline. Brought to you by Pfizer. Making a difference. Brought to you by Pfizer.
CNN Tonight. Brought to you by Pfizer. Early Start. Brought to you by Pfizer. Friday night on Aaron Burnett Out Front. Brought to you by Pfizer. This Week with George Stephanopoulos is brought to you by Pfizer.
This weather report brought to you by Pfizer.
Today's countdown to the royal wedding is brought to you by Pfizer.
And now a CBS Sports Update brought to you by Pfizer.
Meet the Press Data Download. Brought to you by Pfizer.
This portion of CBS This Morning sponsored by Pfizer.
On how to find the hidden sugars in the American family diet. Sponsored by Pfizer.